When workplace communities don't feel supportive, people struggling with their mental health can end up facing barriers instead of finding help. Barriers that stop them from getting support early, making it more likely that a preventable issue becomes a serious problem. It's a problem that's measured in healthcare, human and economic costs, estimated to exceed £300 billion a year in the UK alone. So, how do we create better mental health outcomes no matter what kind of community we're part of or who we work for?
Good mental health and well-being in the workplace starts in the workplace. Some people, because of the size of the organisation that they work in, the sector, the type of work that they do, the time at which they do that work, the location at which they do that work, have fewer access points than others. I think it would be the bravery to ask the questions that might result in answers that make you uncomfortable.
To answer this question, I'm joined by Bertrand Stern-Gillet, CEO of HA Wisdom Wellbeing, the UK and Ireland's leading EAP provider, as we discuss what it means to support mental health at work and how leaders can build stronger communities. Bertrand, great to see you. And
you too, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. I really appreciate you inviting me on. So
excellent. So really excited to dive into our conversation. Firstly, I'd like to hear a bit about your background. I guess specifically what drew you into the world of wellbeing in the first place, because as I understand it, you've been kind of at the helm of HA Wisdom Wellbeing for around 5 years, but then part of the Peninsula Group more widely for around a decade. But then before that, you started off as a criminal defense lawyer. So tell me a bit more about the journey from there to here and how you got into employee wellbeing.
No problem, Matt. I think certainly a really unusual journey, I'd say, and I've been with HA Wisdom Wellbeing for actually about 3.5 years now, and it's definitely the role and the discipline, the sector that has taken me the longest to understand and to appreciate the detail and the nuances and quite frankly, the importance of it. You know, I've worked in a number of different sectors before, but this one's unique. As you say, I'm a lawyer by background. Once I'd qualified, I started doing criminal defence work,
Sure.
Which was fascinating. I loved it. I think I'd grown up probably watching too many American TV shows, so was really interested in that. But look, the law was fascinating. The cases were really interesting. The clients were unique. You know, loads of super interesting people that I got to meet on that journey. But
Sure.
I'd always had a real interest in business and commerce and industry, and that was one thing that wasn't really satisfied by doing criminal defence work.
Right.
But I wanted to blend that with still retaining a really strong core of human interest. So a friend of mine that I'd been to law school with said, have you ever thought about employment law? Because it blends the individual, the human, the person with the business, the industry, the commerce, and really interesting legally as well.
Sure.
And I hadn't, to be honest, but I looked into it, and the more I looked into it, the more I thought, I think this looks fascinating. So it was 17 years ago this summer. I was really fortunate to join the Peninsula Group and spent then around about 9-10 years focusing on employment law, HR, and some health and safety as well. Unsurprisingly, so much from an HR and employment law and health and safety perspective was all around mental health and well-being.
Sure.
And I was really fortunate that I spent a couple of years working in Canada. We support small businesses in Canada as well, so I was working out there for a couple of years, and when I came back from there, was given an opportunity to work with the team at HA Wisdom Wellbeing, and been doing that the last 3.5 years, and it's been the best experience of my life so far.
Firstly, you mentioned American TV shows that kind of shaped your journey initially with law. I'd love to know which ones. But then also, as a follow-up to that one, would you say that there was a defining moment that really cemented and shaped your passion for the space of employee wellbeing?
Do you know what? It's probably a little bit of a cop-out, but I'll turn to a movie rather than a TV show, and it's The Firm. You know,
Is that the You Can't Handle the Truth?
no, that's
Was that A Few
A
Good
Few
Men?
Good Men.
Right, okay, so
The Firm is the one with a really young Tom Cruise as this guy who's he's a waiter in restaurants while at law school, comes from a underprivileged background, whilst at law school, and ends up with this very unusual law firm in Memphis, I think it is. And it turns out that this law firm is a firm that specialises in laundering money for gangsters in the US.
Sure.
And the FBI get onto him, and he ends up trying to, this very complex set of circumstances, but it's a thriller. There's nothing about the law, but it was a brilliant film, and I absolutely loved it as a kid. Funnily enough, I made my boys watch it a few months ago, and I'm not sure they were quite as excited about it as I was, but it probably shows its age now.
Yeah, no doubt. What a way to be inspired.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's probably a lot better stories that you'll meet people of being inspired. But look, I just remember that film, A Few Good Men as well.
Yeah, sure.
Some movies like that, and reading books as well. And that's just what got me interested in the law, I guess.
How do you kind of lead by example when it comes to self-care?
I'm a big digital detox advocate.
Right.
I am really focused on not interacting with my mobile post. Unless someone's called me, I really won't interact with my phone after about 6 p.m. Conversely, I wake up early. I get, well, not that early, but I get up at 5 in the morning, and I will do a bit of work first thing in the morning. And there are other people who are, who have different regimes. A lot of people who say, well, I also get up early, but I will not touch my phone until.
Yes.
And, that's also a really good way. But I think however you do it, having some digital detox time is really important. My wife's the complete opposite. I'll be fast asleep in bed.
Right.
To get up at 5, I go to bed quite early.
She'll be scrolling through.
She'll be scrolling right up until she goes to sleep. And I've tried to talk to her so many times about, and she, like, her father's a doctor. She's much brighter than I am.
She knows better. Basically.
She should know better. And I'm come on, really?
Yeah.
But so that's really important to me. I'm a big advocate of doing something outdoors or some kind of physical activity, and that means different things for different people.
Of course, yes.
I like to run, and we've got a Peloton at home, and then I play golf, and then I've got a dog who needs walking. So that between those 4 things, I will get out, a couple of times a day. That's really important for me as well.
Brilliant.
And then I think the last thing is having some kind of techniques to compartmentalize work and separate that from home. And it's not always easy. I don't always succeed.
Sure.
It is very difficult if you're in certain lines of work, or if you're at certain stages of careers, or if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to build your own organization. Sometimes these things can seem and can be practically impossible, but I'm fortunate that we've got such a great team at HA Wisdom Wellbeing that I know that I can do some compartmentalization and have some time where my mind is pretty much clear of work.
Wow. So it sounds like you're pretty dialed in there in terms of your protective factors, your strategies for self-care, which is, I think, really important as a leader.
Yeah.
Right?
I am. I think I'm quite disciplined about it. I'm probably a bit maybe a bit too structured and ordered about it, but that's just what works.
But that's what's worked for you.
Yeah.
It's what's got you to the head of HA Wisdom Wellbeing, who are trusted by 88,000 organisations. Which, to be honest, if it was just that number that I heard, I would have thought that was all of them in the UK and Ireland. I mean, it sounds like a lot, right? But also, that's providing support for 13.5 million people across all of those organisations. And I think, just thinking about, the current landscape, and what we know in terms of the impact of mental illness, broadly speaking, it's measured in human, economic, and also healthcare costs exceeding £300 billion a year in the UK alone. So, from your perspective, what's the business case for an organization to invest in an EAP?
I mean, you'd expect me to say this, Matt, wouldn't you? But
Go on.
I genuinely think it's a no-brainer.
Okay.
I think, look, there are, when you're an organisation and you're deciding on the kinds of benefits, perks, features that you want to provide to your people to make you an attractive place to come and work, to make you a kind of place where people want to stay, to make it the kind of place where you want to show support for your people. There are loads of things out there, you know, there are all kinds of perks and discounts, there are all kinds of, you know, very fully featured medical solutions, private medical insurance, all kinds of things like this. But the brutal reality is that most organisations, micro SMEs, really small organisations, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 people, couldn't possibly afford a lot of the things that we naturally think about when we think of benefits and features as an employee.
Sure.
You know, private medical insurance, unfortunately, remains out of reach for the majority of employers.
Yeah.
So, whereas an EAP it is super affordable, and the extent of the support that you get for the investment that you make as an organisation is massive, and that's why I say it's a complete no-brainer that all organisations should be at least considering seriously to introduce to their people.
And it's interesting you mentioned there about the affordability, the support at scale, plus all of the other benefits in terms of you know, presenting yourself as an employer of choice and retention and the rest of it. But specifically on that point about the size of an organisation, so I've got some figures to lay out for you here, and I'd like your take on this one.
Yeah.
So these figures are from the Labour Force survey, and it's about the rate of self-reported work-related stress, depression, and anxiety by workplace size per 100,000 workers. Okay. So for small organisations, so under 50 employees, it's 1,620 per 100,000 cases of self-reported stress, depression, and anxiety, and then so on and so forth for medium employees. So employers, so 50 to 249 employees, 2,330. Up to large employers, that means anything over, in their definition, 250 plus, and that's 2,720. So 1,620 to 2,720. The question is, how does that business case, in your opinion, for investment change or shift relative to, in this case, size of organisation, but also the sector that business operates in, and maybe even the demographic of their workforce?
You know what? I'm not sure this is quite answering your question, so definitely pick me up on that later. But you know what I find really interesting about that, Matt, those numbers that you've just set out there, is that there is no chance, in my view, that people in larger organisations have more of the kinds of challenges that people are self-reporting than people in small organisations. I think the reason why you're getting higher percentages of people self-reporting as you go up in terms of organisation size.
Yeah, sure.
Is that those, as you go up in terms of organisation size, you are more likely, not exclusively, but you're more likely to have more fully featured support, resources, benefits, access to mental health and well-being solutions than in smaller organisations, which are going to make people more aware of what they've got going on and feel more supported, feel braver, so more likely then to self-report. And yes. I think the worrying thing about those numbers isn't the numbers themselves, which are worrying, although I think they're probably low. You know, these are people have got to self-report that they've self-reported, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
But I think the worrying thing about those numbers is that smaller organisations, HA Wisdom Wellbeing's got a really strong representation in that area. Smaller organisations really struggle to find solutions to put in place for their people, and that's massively concerning given that most people in work in this country are employed by small to medium-sized organisations.
Essentially, I think what we're saying is the problem is magnified, but it's the other way around. And so actually the larger organization, the further up we go in terms of the size of organization, because there are actually more supports in place, that effectively means more reporting channels, makes it more likely that people would actually come forward.
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
well that makes sense. So and I guess just on the question of access then, here's a term for you, access equity, right? And I'm not sure if it's one that's kind of already out there, but I'm claiming it. How important is access equity? The idea that, no matter the size of business or even, I guess the type of workforce, so whether you're a frontline employee, remote or shift-based workforce, that you have, that they all have access to the same level of support as an office worker, to organisations that want to build mentally healthy communities.
I think, Matt, like any other area of equity, it's just not right or fair that some people, because of the size of the organisation that they work in, the sector, the type of work that they do, the time at which they do that work, the location at which they do that work, have fewer access points than others. I don't know whether this is a particularly popular view, but I think it's, on balance, I think it is harder for people who are working remotely to have access to features, tools, solutions which will help with their work-related mental health. I think it is naturally more challenging from a workplace mental well-being perspective for people working remotely in any event, because they don't have the community support that you will get when in a more collaborative in-person environment. But I think those are a demographic that we really need to look out for when thinking about our wellbeing solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess underlines even more some of the points we mentioned in terms of that business case, that as a bare minimum, regardless of the size or sector of the business, regardless of the type of workforce, that some kind of EAP is in place so that everybody's got access to the same level of support. And then again, kind of moving away from the workplace, it ties into the workplace, but actually it's talking more about the impact on the healthcare sector. So I understand that away from the workplace, there's an additional kind of business case around reduced pressure on the NHS and traditional healthcare from EAPs. Could you talk a bit more about that?
It's funny, actually, because we've been trying to speak to the government for a couple of years about this now, and obviously changes in governments haven't particularly helped the situation, because you just get new people that you need to re-engage.
Start the conversation again.
Every week we will get people who ring us up on our EAP helpline and will say to us, my GP's recommended that I ring you first because they've said that I'm more likely to get support quicker through you than if they put me on one of the NHS mental health pathways.
Wow.
And what's great sometimes, Matt, is that these are absolutely things that an EAP was designed to help with, perhaps lower level issues of anxiety, depression, low mood.
Sure.
But sometimes there are things that people are ringing us up about that EAPs were not designed to support with, and in fact don't have necessarily the expertise to support with. You can imagine some of the more complex and serious matters which would typically result in quite complex referrals on NHS mental health pathways. EAPs aren't generally equipped to deal with those, and of course that then becomes a challenge for the EAP and for the service user who's rung up about that. But no matter how you look at it, having solutions like EAPs reduces some level of burden on the NHS, and that is absolutely a good thing, because it means that the kind of things that EAPs can help with and deal with will free up time for the NHS to deal with more complex matters.
Sure, yeah.
But I think it needs some realization from whichever government's in charge that they should make an investment in that they should provide support, particularly for SMEs, to put in place these kinds of alternative solutions which will help free up NHS time.
I thought that's where you were heading with it. So it's in terms of the request, in terms of what that conversation looks like at government level, it's a case of maybe looking at some kind of subsidized EAP system, so that like you just said there,
exactly
small
that,
businesses
along
can get
with
that support.
a recommendation, or even strong suggestion, or even to a certain extent some kind of mandate that there are a minimum level of benefits and support that employers are required to provide to their people.
And with that in mind, how close or how far away are we from, if that's the ideal scenario, how close or how far away are we from that potentially being a serious conversation?
It has to be balanced, of course, with the fact that more regulation for small business is also a challenge, and I absolutely recognise that.
Yes.
So it's not an easy conversation to have, it's not an easy analysis to undertake, but I think from an economic perspective and from a balancing the government books and balancing the ever-increasing NHS waiting lists perspective, it's a conversation that we need to have.
Absolutely. Okay. And just talking about timescales now, more specifically trends over time. How have you seen the perception and use of EAPs change? Specifically, if we're talking about, before, during, and after something like the pandemic.
So broadly speaking,
Yes.
EAP usage has increased massively. I think, I don't think I'm going to say anything new here. There are people a lot more qualified than me have said this, but I don't think that the increase in awareness and utilisation of mental health related services, I don't think that is entirely a result of a worsening of mental health since the pandemic.
Right.
I think that is responsible for an element of it, but
Yeah.
I think a large element of it is due to an increased awareness, an increased openness, an increased transparency, an increased acceptance to talk about, recognise, understand, accept mental health issues amongst individuals and all levels of mental health and well-being concerns. I don't think that March 2020 suddenly hit and the nation's mental health went, suddenly
Took a nosedive.
I think absolutely the pandemic had a generally worsening effect for certainly a period of time and certainly affected some people more than others. But what I think is probably the main driver is, and this is an amazing thing, is that we've all become much more confident about talking about mental health.
Yeah, which ultimately the net result has to be a positive thing.
It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
We're lucky to be working in this space whilst that is ongoing, because
So lucky.
let's face it, this was something that, as I say, I've only been in the sector for about 3.5 years, but I meet colleagues who have been banging this drum and working all hours to raise awareness about this for 10, 20, 30 years.
Sure.
And for them, there's finally some light at the end of the tunnel because of wider public acceptance.
Yeah, so like you say, it's not a new conversation that we're having now, it's just that the focus has shifted, and that is one of the net results, one of the kind of lasting legacies, if you like, of the pandemic. Yeah.
I think we're quite fortunate as well that we've got that globally we have a number of high profile people, celebrities, actresses, sportsmen and women, in high profile, in the public individuals, in the public eye, who have put their personal struggles on show in front of everyone, and that has given so many people confidence.
I wanted to talk a little bit about AI. Very specifically, I guess your opinion on what role could and does and will large language models like ChatGPT and other AI-based digital platforms play in shaping the future of EAPs?
For me, the ultimate goal of, certainly the ultimate goal at HA Wisdom Wellbeing is, how quickly can we get a service user talking to a trained and qualified counsellor and starting to open up about what their challenges are, what their concerns are, what their worries are, what is causing them difficulty.
Sure.
And if AI can play some part in encouraging people to make that contact earlier, to make that contact quickly, then great. But what I absolutely don't think is that AI should replace the human-to-human interaction that an EAP can bring. That is the crowning jewel of an EAP, the ability to, within seconds of someone ringing, to connect them to a counsellor. And any thoughts or ideas around replacement of that by AI are misguided in my view.
Sure.
But there are a group of people who need encouragement in order to make contact, who perhaps want to do a bit of research themselves before feeling they're ready to reach out, who really need perhaps that encouragement. And if AI can help in that way, then all well and good.
Excellent, and that's really reassuring to hear from my perspective. And essentially what we're saying is that there's room for AI to almost serve as an adjunct to the kind of the essence, the main use case of an EAP, which is to facilitate that human connection.
Yeah,
that's really, like I said, reassuring to hear. So speaking of human connection, this year's theme for Mental Health Awareness Week, which we are just 2 weeks out from at the moment, is about community. So what role do you see EAPs playing in helping organisations to build that sense of connection and support at scale?
When people think about EAPs, Matt, they traditionally think that it's a service that the organisation, so the management of the organisation, provides to the people in the organisation,
right,
so that they can help themselves. But what's often glossed over, forgotten about, underutilised is the support that EAPs can provide to the management teams around how can you be a better supporter of your people? How can you be a better leader? How can you be a better line manager? How can you provide that community within the workplace that will do so much to improve people's work-related mental health? There will be a number of things that managers and those leading organisations can't deal with.
Sure.
But there'll be a whole host of things that they really can, and that they can actually draw out and talk about and bring to the fore before they get worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, it's not just a case of the EAP is, right, here you go, it's available, best of luck. It's actually, there's a lot that you guys as managers or leaders can take from this to be there almost as another layer of support in conjunction with the EAP to help employees thrive.
I think that's exactly it, Matt. I think to create amongst leaders and managers, I'd say a requirement that they, as part of their regular check-ins with colleagues, a personal check-in forms part of that. And again, might not be the most popular view, but that's one of the reasons why I think that in-person working and collaboration is so important, because when you walk past someone, you know often whether they're having a good day or a not so good day.
Sure.
And so difficult when your team are disparate and you might be on a series of video meetings, sometimes with cameras off. It's very difficult to get a real sense of how someone's day is going. But to then ask the question around, how are you? And to remember what they spoke to you about last week in terms of what was going on with the family or what they were doing with friends, and to have a conversation around that it is really important and can result in, the old adage, charity starts at home. Good mental health and well-being in the workplace starts in the workplace, not just by implementing an EAP or some other well-being solution.
In terms of the role that leadership plays in kind of setting the tone of how we go about, using EAPs to build mentally healthy communities, is it about the positioning of the EAP in the first place that kind of, I guess, facilitates that?
I think it's before that.
Yeah.
I think it's your role with a team to check that they're doing all right, and if they're not doing all right, what are you going to do about it to try and help them be better?
Sure. And
sometimes that will be having a conversation. Sometimes that will be referring into the EAP, and sometimes it might be something completely different. But you have to ask the question to be able to see whether you can help. And a lot of people feel awkward about asking the question. But I would say that's on them.
Out of a room of, let's say, 10 managers, if I ask them, let's say, delivering a workshop on mental health awareness, let's say, and I ask them, right, what's your kind of biggest concern when it comes to, helping other people with their challenges around mental health? 7 or 8 of them will say something to the effect of, saying or doing the wrong thing, which is understandable. So I think it's, like you say, it's about understanding that that's actually part of the role. It's not an addition, but also knowing what tools are available so that they can actually be in that position and be confident when the time matters, before the time matters.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, okay. So just speaking about this conversation, thinking more about this conversation with, the role of leadership in building mentally healthy communities, I've got just another statistic here it's from Deloitte from last year, from 2024. And it was a report just kind of underlining the business case for investing in mentally healthy workplaces, and you might be familiar with it, and supporting working parents. And it was 3,156 working adults across the UK, and it said that 60% of employees expect support from senior leadership and managers, but in reality, 70% of them say that support is coming from their peers and managers. So kind of highlighting or indicating that there is a lot of room for leadership specifically, not just middle managers, but leadership itself to actually step up. So in your opinion, if there was one shift in mindset that you'd like to see from business leaders around mental health, what would that be?
Bravery to ask the questions that might result in answers that make you uncomfortable.
Okay.
And at least offer to continue that conversation. There will be people, quite understandably, whom you will ask as a leader. You'll be having a one-to-one with someone and you'll start to check in with them to check that they're okay. And they might not want to interact with you for lots of very good reasons. And that's okay too. And you need to have the EQ, the emotional intelligence, to be able to read that and to not... this isn't a checkbox on a management toolkit, so this isn't, I must get to the end of the road, otherwise I will have failed in my management duties. Sometimes the end of the road comes very quickly because you'll sense that now's not the right time, that person wants to talk to me, maybe they don't want to talk to me at all, and some of that's all right, but you won't know that until you try, and it's important. In fact, I would say it's a duty to try, and And then if you then get someone who does want to talk to you about it, then to listen and to support and to think about what you can do to help that individual. And that might be something that you do personally, but it might also be something that you help that person with personally. For example, an EAP referral, or
Yes.
for example, could be something as simple as might a long weekend help?
Right.
You know, something. So you might say, you know, oh well, have you thought about, you know, having a day off, or have you thought about? It might be something like, well, we can pull someone else onto a project to help you with it, or you know, there are lots of different things, but you need to ask to find solutions.
Yeah, to ask and again to be in a position to know what options are available. It's almost like a toolbox,
Correct.
effectively, to help people feel psychologically safe and give them the options to make an informed choice to address the challenges that are causing them the most issues.
Yeah.
And I've heard that one recently as well, in terms of, I guess you could call it, tactical use of annual leave. You know, just booking several long weekends throughout the year, just so you know you're getting that bit of an extra break. Or even a manager, you know, kind of leading by example in terms of, you know, their relationship with technology and the screen time. So kind of blocking out time in their diary and saying, look, I'm available for Teams calls, but only in these hours of the day, type thing. And, you know, I think that's so important because, you know, people are so much more likely to kind of follow what we do rather than what we say. It needs to be followed up in action. But speaking of actions, very specifically then, just on all of this, how do leaders and managers get comfortable being uncomfortable?
I don't think that all of us love waiting in the queue to go on a big roller coaster. I think we all get
I love that analogy.
jitters and stomach starts to churn, or you know, I'm fortunate, I'm not afraid of heights, but even when I go up a really tall building and I look over the edge, my legs feel slightly jelly-like, slightly wobbly.
Okay.
But I put myself in those situations because I think, well, I'd like to see the view. I'd like to, I've come all the way up this building, so I want to try and ensure that I'm maximising what is going on here. And I think that's exactly the same kinds of thing, that we need to accept that it might be uncomfortable for us, but it's the right thing to do, and good is going to come of it.
Okay, wonderful. So in terms of what's worked for yourself then as a leader, it's a case of putting yourself in a position to get a wider field of view, to get the big picture.
Correct.
You're going up to the top floor of the building, even if you are scared of heights.
Yeah.
You're embracing that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And what does the future hold for Health Assured, for HA Wisdom Wellbeing?
Across our group, we support SMEs in 5 countries worldwide now. So
that's the UK.
So the UK,
Canada,
Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And we're already, you know, a year ago, we had our EAP and mental health and wellbeing services in the UK and Ireland, but we're now fortunate that we've been able to make them accessible for organisations in Australia and New Zealand. So, you know, we're still really at the very early stages in those countries, but those are exciting times. And then I think we're making a lot of improvements, and I would say from 18 months ago we had one colleague focused on risk and safeguarding. We now have a team of 5. We're doing a lot of things in order to expand the range of our services so that we can support more people with the more complex matters that they're presenting with.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. So really doubling down on your capabilities to provide support at scale so that businesses can continue to build and sustain mentally healthy communities.
Yeah.
Amazing. Bertrand, it's been a pleasure catching up. Thank you for joining me today.
I really appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you. This has been Wellbeing Talk with myself, Matt Balfour, your guide to more accessible conversations about mental health in the workplace. Be sure to subscribe to the Let's Go Wellbeing YouTube channel, and we'll connect on the next episode.